The MCAT Cars Podcast, session number 8. The Cars section of the MCAT gives thousands of pre-meds nightmares every night. Whether you're an ESL student, lack confidence while reading, or are a slow reader like me, Jack Westin and the medical school headquarters are here to help you score higher in every section so you can be confident you're ready to get the MCAT score of your dreams. Welcome to the MCAT Cars Podcast. My name is Dr. Ryan Gray, and I am joined, as always, by Jack Westin from Jack Westin, the expert MCAT Cars tutor. We are breaking down an interesting article today from Commonweal Magazine, all about footnotes. This was an interesting one, a hard one. And you'll hear, this one was hard for me, and it is probably hard for a lot of you. And Jack will help me read through and understand what we're reading so that at the end of it, we can hopefully answer some questions on the MCAT. All right, Jack, back with some more MCAT Cars podcast. I hope we have a fun passage again like last week where we got to talk about Beyonce and Drake and Taylor Swift.
I think this one's interesting. I don't know if you might find it interesting. It has something to do with celebrity stuff. I mean, it's not really celebrity-based, but it's like the other side of celebrities. So I think we could find some interest in it.
And I really think the ultimate thing is just to make sure that I think as you read through the passages, don't let the emotions of, ooh, I like this topic, or ooh, this topic looks boring, kind of get in your head. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because then you're just setting yourself up for failure to begin with. You're like, oh, darn it. Like, I have no idea what this passage is going to be about, and you haven't even read anything yet.
Yeah, the goal is to go in with a blank slate, open-minded, right? Embrace anything that comes your way, right? You're going to learn something new, right? We're about to learn something new about something that we've never probably read about before. So I think that alone is exciting, whether it's about Beyonce or whether it's about, like literature dying or whatever we were talking about. It makes no difference. We're learning something new. And I really think that's what makes Cars so special from the other sections of this exam is you're just reading and understanding and learning as you're testing yourself.
All right, let's dive in. So the famous, wrote Elizabeth Hardwick in her essay, Wives and Mistresses, carry about with them a great weight of patriarchal baggage. The footnotes of their lives. I'm right off the bat, I'm kind of confused. I'm like, the famous what? But then I keep reading, it's an essay, Wives and Mistresses, and then patriarchal baggage. So I'm wondering if this is something about famous wives. And that's all I know at this point.
Yeah, and so they're using the famous as a way to bring in the wives and mistresses, right? So if we want to break this sentence down, it's basically saying that the famous carry, right, something with them, right? The footnotes of their lives. So something that they carry is a footnote, right? We don't know exactly what that is, but we can probably assume it's their wives or mistresses or someone secondary to them, right? Mm-hmm. That's it.
And we have a name, Elizabeth Hardwick.
Correct. So this is what Hardwick wrote.
Yep.
Right.
Hardwick, a sort of self-styled footnote to a famous man herself, knew what she was talking about. So the author is saying that Hardwick herself is carrying around something, this footnote, because she herself was either married to or related to or had relationships with a famous man.
Right. The footnote is the baggage.
Yep.
Right. So if you go back to the first sentence, I think this is important to point out. Do you see the M dash? It's just a hyphen. It's like a dash, right?
Yep.
That separates important stuff from maybe not so important stuff. So the footnotes is not that important. It's just another way of saying baggage.
Yep.
Okay. And in some way, the author is saying that Hardwick was a footnote, was this baggage to a famous person, a famous man. Okay.
I'm just excited that you knew what that M dash is, or I call it an EM dash. That EM dash, and I'm excited that the writer knew how to use this dash, because a lot of people put a space before and after it, which you're not supposed to do. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things that I never knew anything about it until I started writing books, and I'm like, oh, now I know what this is, and I've been spreading the gospel ever since.
Nice.
But side note, footnotes. She continues, worry a lot. Footnotes. So this baggage, worry a lot. I don't know if it is the author. Well, it's the author is writing. She continues. So she's attributing this to Hardwick. The worry a lot. Is that worrying other people? That's the question.
Think about it this way, right? You have a mistress, you have a wife, right? A famous person has a wife or a mistress.
And a mistress.
And a mistress, yeah. And they worry. That's all it is. These people are worrying. That's it.
Okay. They can be mistresses and wives, sometimes but not often husbands, friends and enemies, partners in sudden assignations. I'm lost in this sentence because I'm like, mistresses and wives, sometimes husbands, friends and enemies, partners, they're like pitting each other against, showing the dichotomy between the two.
Right. It's basically suggesting that a footnote could be anyone. It could be a wife or a mistress. It could be a husband. It's someone secondary to the famous person. It's someone not so important.
Okay.
In a way.
Okay, I think that for me. So this goes back to my struggle with reading comprehension. Is I didn't put together the they as footnotes, and then so for somebody reading this, especially ESL students, because we're attributing they. A lot of people will be like, well, they hasn't been defined yet.
They assume that we're still on the same conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
But for me, I struggle with that. So footnotes, and footnotes are these things, this baggage.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I think the fact that it starts with footnotes, she continues, tells you that we're still talking about footnotes. But it's easy to lose track of that as you read the next sentence.
Yeah. That's why, and this is just something I know from being in medicine and being around a lot of Indian physicians. And I have Indian friends who say today morning. I don't know if you know this, Jack. Mm-hmm. You know, Indians say today morning instead of this morning.
I mean, I've heard of that. Yeah.
Because this hasn't been defined yet. So how can you say this morning, right? And so I think this is a good example of where somebody may get tripped up. You're like, what's they? I don't know. But anyway, kind of a side note.
That makes a lot of sense.
All right, continuing on. Some have been the inspiration for poems or have seen themselves expropriated for the transformations of fiction. So they're saying that these women, sometimes husbands, these footnotes are poems potentially written into fiction, used as stories.
Great.
They have written and received letters, been lied to, embezzled, abandoned, honored, or slandered. So they are... A lot of those things aren't very good. Abandoned, embezzled. Some of them are honored, received letters. So they're just saying that things are happening to them.
You're right.
But there they are, entering history with them, which is italicized, with the celebrity artists, generals, prime ministers, presidents, tycoons. So the author is saying, and all of this is actually in quotes, so a lot of this is, I think, attributed to Hardwick, which we have to keep straight. And Hardwick, I think, is saying that they're entering history as a footnote to them, to typically the male that they have been associated with.
That's exactly it. Yeah. And I love how you made that connection. You're like, oh, well, we have to make sure we know who's saying this. And that's very important. It's Hardwick. Hardwick is saying all this stuff, right? I mean, it's quoting Hardwick. So the author may or may not disagree with this. We don't know. Agree or disagree. We don't know. But we do know Hardwick's opinion on this.
Okay.
What's the big picture here for this paragraph?
That these footnotes are attached to more important people, or important people potentially have footnotes attached to them.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like they're that important, right? Like things happen to them, but it seems like they're secondary in a way.
Yep.
All right.
Literature can have a fraught relationship with these also-rans of life. So now we're back to the author writing, so not in quotes, and the author is saying that literature, writings, can have an interesting fraught relationship. If you don't know what fraught is, I guess just think that there's this relationship with these also-rans. Something's happening. Okay? On the one hand, the overlooked and insignificant people of the world have an appeal as unexplored dramatic territory. The overlooked and insignificant people, so the footnotes, I think, is what they're referring to there. They have an appeal as unexplored dramatic territory. So literature, so people writing about these people, think they're appealing because they're unexplored territory and it's potentially dramatic because they're attached to famous people. Right,
and it calls them also rands of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what they said in the first sentence. So maybe they're not well received.
Mm-hmm.
And the second sentence goes on and says overlooked and insignificant. That's pretty powerful. So these footnotes, whoever they may be, are not significant, but they can be appealing, right? They could be explored in some way. All right.
On the other, they may not produce matching enthusiasm from readers who want to know why they ought to be setting foot in that territory in the first place. So the author is saying that if there is something written about or whatever, there's literature about these footnotes, that readers may wonder why they should be interested in them.
Correct.
Okay. While the novelist might rejoice in his subject, some readers tend to yawn. Really, another story of some tedious nobody. Tedious nobody. Man. So we have overlooked, insignificant people, tedious nobody, also rans. I'm wondering, I think the takeaway here is that the author thinks that, doesn't really think well of these people, and also is saying that the audience, readers, are wondering why there is more literature about them because they're not important.
We don't know if the author likes or doesn't like them because the author is simply showing us how they are portrayed in society, right? So the author is saying this is how people see them, right? Really? Another story of some tedious nobody? That's how other people see them. Maybe that's how the author sees them as well. I mean, that's potentially the way the author sees them because why else would the author say that? But it seems like the author is painting a picture for what society sees them as.
Okay. I'd probably lose that point if that was a question.
They will never ask that about this paragraph. You have to read the whole thing in order to know the author's perspective, right? This is just one way the author is describing these people. We don't really know the author's opinion yet.
Okay.
Right. It's not set in stone yet. This is the thing with Carr's passages. They're very fluid. The author could present points from different angles and not take a point or take a direction, right? Or side with one of those angles. And then you have other passages where the author is very lopsided, on one side, totally on one side. So it just depends on what you're reading and how they're saying it. And a lot of students are not necessarily comfortable with that, but with experience, you realize this is just a conversation. Okay.
The take home for me is stop jumping to conclusions.
Right. Be open to anything happening at any time, right? And just try to understand it for what it's trying to say. It's trying to say that these less important people are kind of difficult for literature to depict. These less important people are not something that literature has been been able to depict well, right? Or in a way that people enjoy. Do the third paragraph.
2, these tedious nobodies might be overlooked for reasons that become easy to discern rather quickly. So the author's saying that there may be other reasons that these people are overlooked.
Sounds good.
And again, more negative language. So I keep reading into this negative language, tedious nobodies. Right? I'm like, man, the author keeps using this negative language.
I mean, it seems like the author doesn't like them. You could definitely think that way, but the way the author is saying it, the way the author is kind of using a rhetorical way of saying this, right? To convince you this is how society sees them, right? So that's the hard part. How do you know whether this is the author's opinion or whether this is the author's opinion on how society sees them as? That distinction doesn't matter right now, right? It doesn't matter because right now they're the same. But be open to the author changing their opinion, right? And being aware that this is what the author's doing will help you with that. Go ahead.
What to do with the obscure person who is not a hidden gem or a tortured soul, but simply what he appears to be? Oh. I don't know what he's trying to say there.
Same thing we've been saying this whole time, right? So go ahead, take your time, try to break it down. What do you I don't recommend rereading it.
Yeah.
But what was going on before? What's been occurring before this?
The author is just talking about these nobodies, and why they are overlooked potentially.
Okay. So the author in this sentence is just saying, what do we do with these people, right? We don't like them. What do we do with these people? What should happen, right? And that's just another way the author is trying to show us that society doesn't care about them, right? So what I'm imagining is some kind of golem or some kind of like troll, like what do we do with this thing, And that's how the author is trying to portray Footnotes in a negative light, that people don't know what to do with them. They're kind of bad, like they're icky, what should we do, right? So that's the way the author is trying to speak to us right now.
Oh, getting heavy in here. While I rather like, for instance, the heroine of Jane Austen's Mansfield Park, her stick-in-the-mud qualities have made her infamously dull to many. So the author is introducing another work of art here, Jane Austen's Mansfield Park, and he's saying that he likes it or she likes it, the author likes it, but many people find her dull, or the heroine dull.
This is making it very clear, right? So the author likes this footnote, but maybe other people don't, okay?
How do we, the word that you use there, the author likes the footnote, how are we supposed to tie in the heroine of Jane Austen's Mansfield Park as a footnote?
Well, what have we been talking about this whole time?
Well, the footnotes.
So unless they make it clear it's something else, we have to assume it's a footnote.
Well, they say the heroine, so I'm like, oh, maybe something different. Right? Isn't heroine a good word?
So that's the thing. They can use different ways to explain the same thing, okay, right? So in this case, it may be perceived a little bit different, but not so much so that it changes the footnote. It's still a footnote in some way, right? And that's where assumptions come in and can kill you, right? Because if you start thinking, well, it's a heroine, it's not a footnote, you're confusing yourself. They never educated on the difference there. So we have to assume that it's just a footnote.
Okay. Sometimes boring people are simply that, boring. So boring people, footnotes are just footnotes. They're boring.
Right. Now, in this case, maybe they're not exactly footnotes that they're talking about, but whoever it is, they're lesser known people, most likely footnotes. They say stick in the mud qualities. You don't need to know what stick in the mud really means, right? But it probably is associated to being boring, because then they continue and say, have made her infamously dull to many. So it's probably something that's bad or something that's boring. Okay, so what's the big picture of this paragraph?
For me, really, the big picture is just the last sentence, that boring people are just boring.
Yeah, that's it. Sounds good.
Still, I'll say that books that linger on in the unattractive and uninteresting are some of my favorites, even the ones that cheat a bit by making their subjects dramatically flawed. So the author here is saying that books that are dealing with these footnotes, unattractive and uninteresting, are the author's favorites.
Yeah, sounds good.
I enjoy Barbara Pym's Extra, Excellent Women. I relax as Judith Hearn slides into alcoholism and despair. I grumble along with the underground man. I follow Bernano's country priest as he struggles to minister to a parish that really would rather he didn't. And so these are just several pieces of works that the author is listing that he or she likes. Even in more sweepingly ambitious novels, there's usually one or two mediocrities flitting about, sad and self-conscious, and I attach myself to them. So again, just pointing out that there are some books out there where there's mediocre things, but the author really likes that.
That's it. That is exactly it. So the author seems to enjoy reading about these footnotes, and the other paragraphs have suggested that they are boring. So now we see that distinction, that the author likes the footnotes, likes reading about them, whereas society as a whole, not so much.
Madame Bovary, Gustave Flaubert's novel of a beautiful, restless woman who marries a dull but good man and slowly destroys both of them, is itself a kind of tribute to insignificance. So again, just one more example of a book that the author likes that that others may apparently think are just footnotes and not good.
Right.
Emma Bovary sees herself as someone who deserves some sort of attention that is never quite under her command. It eludes her in marriage and in adultery and in her occasional fits of piety. So again, the author's just describing this character, this footnote in this book that the author says he or she likes. The ways she seeks to extract something deeper from life mostly land her in debt. So the author is painting this picture of this one character in this novel, this story, this work of art, whatever it is, and showing that this character is trying to extract something deeper, maybe trying not to be a footnote, but it just keeps landing her in more debt.
Yeah, sounds good.
Even if her suicide is a shabbier affair than it ought to be, dragged out over days as her skin becomes covered with black spots from the arsenic she ate. Wow, that doesn't sound very fun. So again, just pointing this picture of this character who is not well known, is a footnote.
Right, and you don't need to really know exactly what the footnote is doing, but it seems like it's interesting to the author, right? Like they're doing something that maybe most people don't find interesting, but the author does.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an example of one of those pieces that the author likes, other people don't necessarily like.
Yeah. Okay. Many readers are as charmed by Emma as she is charmed by herself, arriving at the book's conclusion filled with a passionate hatred for Emma Bovary's hapless husband, Charles, whose fault that sad situation must somehow be. So the author here is now bringing in Charles, right? Because the footnote has to have the patriarch, apparently, according to the first sentence. So now we have Charles and blaming Emma's footnote situation on Charles.
In this Emma Bovary's novel, she's most likely the main character, which is kind of weird. But in a way, the author is suggesting that people are actually liking this person. Well, most likely someone who is a footnote, right? Yeah, that's it. So, and what is happening with the husband? Is the husband a charming person or not so charming, or
hapless?
What? Hapless, yeah. So maybe someone who's sad, a sad situation. Someone who's kind of dull in some way. Okay.
We can drive people to betray us and even invite us by passivity, indifference, blindness, and self-hatred, writes Judith Sklar, for instance, in her essay on betrayal in ordinary vices. So we're introduced to another voice here, Judith Sklar, who wrote an essay on betrayal. And the author is showing us that Judith wrote that we can drive people to betray us, invite us, etc., by indifference, self-hatred.
Yeah, it seems kind of weird. Why are we talking about this new person talking about how we can drive people to betray us, right? But, we got to continue reading to understand it. Let's go ahead.
Charles Bovary is not an innocent. He is simply so passive and deliberately blind that he will not see that his wife has lovers. He is too self-centered to recognize her or her growing troubles. And so that was in quotes from Judith's writing. And so Judith is showing how Charles drove Emma to betray him.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like, Judith is basically saying that it's the husband's fault that Emma's being disloyal, right? Which is, I don't know, that's kind of interesting. Okay.
Emma's adulteries are a minor betrayal. Her married situation, mean and dull. A minor betrayal. It's interesting how she's classifying it as minor. Okay.
So what's the big picture here? Because it seems like they're going off tangent and talking about Emma Bovary's story, right? Does that really matter, though? Does that story about like how she betrays her husband or how her husband is dull, does that really affect the bigger picture here?
I don't know. I'm not sure what the bigger picture is here as I'm reading.
Well, we talked about it. What was that? Like, what were we talking about right before this? What was the author saying right before we read this paragraph?
We were talking about... Oh, man. We were talking about footnotes and boring people are boring and...
Well, that was earlier. But
yeah.
Then the author seemed to like footnotes.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And the author liked them.
Emma Bovary seems to be a character that she like resonates with or likes, and is one of those footnotes, right? That maybe other people find boring.
Yeah.
But then they go into this story that really distracts you from that bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important to not lose sight of why we're talking about this. Sure, at the end, we bring up Judith and how Judith believes that it's okay to betray people if you're boring, right? Or if you're boring, betrayal's not as bad as being boring. But what really matters at this stage is that you realize we talked about Emma Bovary to show that maybe these footnotes are not so boring. Maybe they have some interesting characteristics. I like to say that, like, you were so engrossed with the whole story of Emma, betraying and having a dull husband that you forgot the fact that, like, we're like she's boring, right? Like that's what the author's trying to make us believe, right? Like Emma's story may actually be interesting. So this last paragraph is basically saying that readers may actually find her interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, and we know that because of the first sentence of that paragraph, right? Because it says readers are as charmed by Emma as she is charmed by herself. So we know that maybe some readers actually find her interesting.
Okay.
So what's the big picture of this entire passage? Like, what should you know after reading this entire passage?
Oh, man, that there are these footnotes that a lot of people find boring and don't want to know anything about, but the author really likes them and really likes digging into them as subjects of books.
That's it. That's it. And this is a good article because it shows you how the author can bring up a point of view and then potentially challenge that point of view, and how you have to decipher the author's point of view from what the author believes other people think. So this kind of this kind of article is common on the real test, and it's a good representation of what you may see.
Yeah, it's interesting. I keep like looking back to these like very negative words of also rans and insignificant people, and I wonder if the author really thinks that, but just likes to read about them. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but we can't read into it that far. We just have to know that the author likes reading about them, whether she thinks they're also rans or not.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, remember the first half of this article is trying to paint the picture that they are nobodies.
Yep.
Right. And that's where a lot of students get confused because they're thinking, well, they're nobodies. That's true. They're always going to be nobodies because that's what the author believes people think.
Yep.
Right. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the author believes. So in the way, like in the process of helping us understand how people think, we may actually misperceive and misinterpret it as it means for the author's purpose, right? Like we may accidentally believe this is what the author believes. So we got to be careful with that. We got to be careful and make sure we know who's saying what and why it's being said. And that's why reading a lot, keeping track of the bigger picture, being very strict when you read and interpret something is very, very helpful for this.
All right, there you have it. Was that one hard for you, as it was for me? I kept getting confused. I'm like, who are they talking about? These footnotes? Are we talking about a footnote anymore? Are we not? This one was really, really difficult for me. So hopefully going through it with Jack, hearing how he broke down the sentences, the paragraphs, and the passage as a whole will help you increase your strategies and increase your confidence going into the MCAT. If you want some more free CARS prep, go to medicalschoolhq.net/Jack Westin. Click on the practice tab at the top, and you can sign up for the daily CARS MCAT questions that are delivered right to your email inbox every day, like clockwork, where you can get some free practice in a test environment that's similar to what you will see on MCAT test day. Again, medicalschoolhq.net/Jack Westin. Click on practice at the top, or you can text the word MCAT CARS to 44222, and we'll send you a link to that. Hope you have a great week. We'll see you next time here on the MCAT CARS podcast. When you use the links provided in this podcast, you're helping to support MedEd Media and the podcasts that we produce. Not only do you get a discount, but we earn a small commission as well. Thank you for your support. Friends and enemies, partners in sudden
assignation.
in sudden assignations.